Hi, my name's Nick Molden from Emissions Analytics, and welcome to my presentation on are gasoline vehicles being promoted over diesels as an artifact of the pollutants measured. Very quickly on emissions analytics, we're now 10 years old. We're headquartered in the UK, but with operations around the world, including in Europe, US, down in California, and in South Korea, in Asia. We specialize in independent real-world emissions testing, so on the road, in real conditions. We've so far tested over 2,500 vehicles of all shapes and sizes, from the smallest passenger car up to large off-road and marine applications. We put all our data into a commercially available database and also work with everyone up and down the supply chain, from regulators and down to fleets and consumer media. Personally, I'm also chairman of two standardization workshops in Europe, SEN Workshop 90 on tailpipe NOx and Workshop 103 on in-cabin pollution. The overview of what I wanted to say briefly today in the slot we have is that Europe has moved decisively away from diesels, obviously, since Dieselgate, and diesel in light duty below the pickup segment has had limited penetration. In doing so, I mean, this is foregoing approximately an 18% reduction in CO2 that diesel affords. But since Dieselgate, I mean, diesels have very much got on top of NOx. And I'll share some data to that extent, and particles have been well controlled since the introduction of filters. So I just wanted to put out the rather controversial, potentially challenging suggestion that maybe diesels is now a dominant technology over gasoline. Maybe it shouldn't be written off into the dustbin of history. And what I'm inviting you to do is stand back from just looking at what is currently regulated and ever tighter limits on those pollutants, and consider in the wider view of a range of unregulated pollutants as well. The measurements we are taking, a core of it is regulatory compliant PEMs. We run a fleet of PEMs from Sensors Inc. It does the standard carbon, nitrogen gases, and all the stuff you would expect, to which we've added the particle number counter down to 23 nanometers at the moment, and also integrated a ammonia sensor for diesel measurement. But the data also today will come from a SIFT MS systems. This is a selected ion flow tube mass spectrometer we're using to speciate VOCs, and this is supplied by Anatune company in the UK, which gives us real-time mass quantification and simultaneous measurement of multiple VOCs. The downside is that it's not mobile, but we work around that within this testing. So the position on regulated pollutants, I mean, this chart is all the diesel vehicles we've ever tested with the date of registration on the horizontal and the real world NOx. The main point is that actually they were terrible and on average 5 times above their limit in the past. But as soon as RDE was introduced, that's the yellow dots bottom right, suddenly vehicles become compliant. So that the spotlight of real world monitoring has brought that technology into compliance. The technology existed to do that. And put it in the context in the table of the other powertrains as well, you can see that all forms of diesels are post RDE well below the 80 milligram regulated limit, and getting down towards the levels of gasoline vehicles as well. If we focus in a little bit more and look specifically at nitrogen dioxide, we see a very similar pattern. That diesels now post RDE are down to really very low levels, so 10 milligrams per kilometer on average for non-hybridized diesels. So still higher than gasoline, but down really very low. And in fact, the NO2 fraction is also falling from 34% pre-RDE down to 27. The suggested limit for Euro 7 is 20 milligrams, so the diesels there are well compliant with that already. Moving on to the particle number, and the overall message here is that everything is quite comfortably compliant, and actually was pretty much so pre-RDE Euro 6 as well. In this case, the diesels are down to conformity factors of 98% below the regulated level. In this case, gasoline is around 1 times 10 to the 11 particles post RDE, so still well below the limit, but not as good as diesels. The only powertrain there which seems to hold any particular worries is the plug-in hybrid gasolines, and where the weakness is to do with cold start and also increasingly heavy vehicles. Looking at particle mass emissions as well on diesels, this is evidence of the effectiveness of the particle filters. What we're finding in real world operation is the tailpipe particle mass is averaging 0.113 milligrams per kilometre compared to a regulated limit of 4.5 milligrams on the PMP approach. So that's 97% below the limit. So that's on 3 representative diesel vehicles in urban, rural and motorway driving. And what's striking there is not just how low the absolute values are, but the consistency between the vehicles. Finally, on the sort of existing regulated pollutants, carbon dioxide. And this goes to the point about diesels inherently being lower CO2 than carbon dioxide, and that's borne out in the official values, which have improved by about 10% over the last 5 years. But also on these real world figures on our test cycle, which is what is shown in the table. So here we can see that diesel is averaging 163 grams per kilometre of CO2 compared to gasoline of 180. Now, it's worth noting that the fleet CO2 target now in Europe is 95 grams per kilometre, so all the powertrains are well above that. But diesel is relatively lower than gasoline, but higher than the hybridized versions of gasoline. So overall, would we say that diesel is a dominant technology over gasoline? I think the answer is no. Diesel with DPF is clearly better for particle number, carbon monoxide as well as carbon dioxide. But gasoline is still better for NOx and particle mass, but it's now very close. So diesel may not be dominant, but its weaknesses of the past have now really been eroded. But what about if we widen out to look at unregulated pollutants? Well, actually, gasoline vehicles seem to hold an issue with ammonia emissions, as shown here, where we taken a gasoline vehicle and done a cold start and then followed by a revving at 750 seconds, and we get a very large spike over 400 micrograms per meter cubed, and then as a permanently elevated rate after that. And this is likely to do with an overloading of the catalyst. And the average emissions over the test of 50 compared to below 1 microgram per meter cube for 2 representative diesel vehicles we tested. So rather than ammonia slip on SCRs being the problem, it looks potentially like it is the catalyst in gasoline vehicles, which is the issue. If we look at VOCs and hydrocarbons, irritants and carcinogens, a wide range of things from heptane, methane through to xylene and ethyl benzene. Again, we're comparing a gasoline vehicle to a diesel vehicle, both very, very new vehicles. And we see it's heptane during cold start particularly, which is problematic on the gasoline, 60 times higher than the diesel over the tests, and elevated for about 8 minutes. Diesel, in contrast, it has a very brief spike in certain VOCs at cold start, but it's more around the revving of the engine at 750 seconds, which leads to elevated VOCs. But if you look at the vertical axis, an order of magnitude less from the diesel. Oxygenates shows a similar pattern. Cold start is the problem on gasoline, and it's load based for the diesel engines, but order of magnitude greater on the gasoline vehicles. So the conclusion is that diesel isn't dominant, but it is similar or better on almost all pollutants. It does also have the other downside of being more expensive, vulnerable to durability issues, and heavier, like for like. But thinking of the context of lockdown and COVID, air quality has not improved as much as expected, and that's due to the role of ozone. And so VOCs are increasingly important worldwide in air quality, more so potentially than NO2 concentrations. And so that is why those VOCs, as well as ammonia from gasoline vehicles, possibly now should be upweighted in the range of regulations relative to NOx, and that would potentially put a different spin and a relative value on diesels versus gasoline. So on that note, thank you very much for listening, and happy to discuss with anyone afterwards. Thank you.